A little boy's salute leaves the crowd speechless. The warm afternoon sun shone over Buckingham Palace, reflecting off the golden gates as a steady stream of tourists gathered outside. Among them was 6-year-old Oliver, his small hands gripping his father's as they walked through the crowd. But while others marveled at the grandeur of the palace, Oliver's attention was fixed elsewhere. Standing tall in his red tunic and black bearskin hat, a royal guard remained motionless at his post, his gaze locked straight ahead. To most people, he was just another part of the palace's timeless tradition, a symbol of discipline and duty. But to Oliver, he was a real-life hero. Oliver had been obsessed with the royal guards ever since he first saw them in a book. He spent hours practicing his salute in front of a mirror, determined to one day stand as strong and fearless as they did. Today, dressed in his own miniature version of the uniform, he finally had the chance to meet one in person. His father chuckled as Oliver tugged on his hand. "You know, son, the guards don't move. No matter what happens, they just stand there." Oliver tilted his head. "But they're real soldiers, right?" "Of course. Some of the best." That was all Oliver needed to hear. If they were real soldiers, then surely they would recognize another soldier, even a small one. Determined, he let go of his father's hand and took a step forward. The chatter of tourists faded as Oliver positioned himself directly in front of the royal guard, his tiny frame standing just a few feet away. He took a deep breath, straightened his back, and did exactly what he had practiced so many times before. With sharp precision, he snapped into a perfect salute, his small hand raised firmly to his forehead. For a moment, no one noticed. Then, slowly, heads began to turn. At first, only a few tourists spotted Oliver's tiny salute. A woman nudged her friend, whispering with a smile. A father pointed him out to his young son. But soon, more people began to notice. The contrast was striking, a towering royal guard, unmoving, unshakable, and in front of him, a small boy, standing as straight as his little body would allow, mirroring the soldier's posture with remarkable accuracy. Oliver held his salute, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had to stay still, just like the guards did. He had practiced this. More whispers spread through the crowd. "Look at that little soldier. He's so brave. Do you think the guard will react?" Oliver didn't move. He kept his hand raised, his face serious, his feet planted firmly. He wanted to prove that he was just as disciplined as the real guards. But there was one problem. The royal guard didn't move either. His expression remained unreadable, his posture unshaken. His rifle rested in its usual position, his gaze locked forward as if Oliver wasn't there. Oliver's excitement wavered slightly. Had the guard even noticed him? A few seconds passed, then 10, then 15. His arm started to tremble slightly, but he refused to drop it. The crowd was completely silent now, their focus locked on the moment unfolding before them. Would the guard respond? Or would he truly remain still, as his duty demanded? The crowd grew completely silent. Every tourist who had been casually snapping pictures, every passerby who had once been admiring the grandeur of Buckingham Palace, was now fixated on a single moment. A tiny boy, standing barely over 3 feet tall, held his salute firmly in front of a towering royal guard, whose presence exuded discipline, authority, and an almost untouchable aura of duty. Oliver's small chest rose and fell as he held his position, his little fingers trembling ever so slightly. He had practiced for this moment, imagined it over and over again in his bedroom, but now, Under the gaze of hundreds of people, it felt different. More real. More intense. And yet, the guard did not move. His face remained blank, his gaze unwavering, his rifle resting in the same rigid grip it had held for hours. The only movement came from the occasional breeze that ruffled the golden tassels of his uniform. Nothing else. The tension was palpable. A middle-aged man in the crowd leaned toward his wife, whispering, "They never react, do they?" His wife, holding their young daughter close, shook her head. "Not unless there's a threat." "But he's just a boy." A few feet away, a young woman raised her phone, recording the moment. "I've never seen this before," she murmured. Oliver's father stood with his arms crossed, watching closely. He had told his son not to expect a reaction. He had tried to explain that the royal guards were trained not to acknowledge distractions, no matter what. And yet, deep down, even he was hoping for something. Oliver himself had no doubts. He held on to one belief, that real soldiers recognized other soldiers. Maybe he wasn't old enough to carry a rifle, maybe he wasn't trained like them, but in his heart, he wanted to be one of them. And if this guard was a true soldier, then he would see him. Wouldn't he? The seconds stretched into eternity. Oliver's arm started to ache, but he refused to drop his salute. He wouldn't break. He wouldn't move. Then, just when everyone was sure that nothing would happen, something did. A shift. It was so small, so precise, that most people wouldn't have noticed. But to Oliver, and to those watching closely, it was everything. The guard breathed in deeply, his gloved hand twitching ever so slightly. And then, he moved. The reaction was instant. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave, spreading from one onlooker to another. Then came the applause. Some clapped in excitement, others simply stood in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Oliver's breath caught in his throat. His wide blue eyes stared up at the towering guard, hardly believing what had just happened. Had he really? His tiny hand slowly lowered from his forehead as he turned to his father, his mouth open in shock. "Dad? Did you see that? He saluted me." His father chuckled, shaking his head in amazement. "I saw it, buddy. I don't think anyone here missed it." The crowd had completely shifted now. Moments ago, they had been passive spectators, tourists capturing a routine visit to Buckingham Palace. But now? Now they had witnessed something rare, something special. Parents lifted their children onto their shoulders, murmuring about how they had never seen a royal guard react before. A young woman wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, smiling at the heartwarming moment. "That little boy just melted my heart," she whispered to her friend. The royal guard, meanwhile, had already returned to his position, his white-gloved hands once again resting firmly on his rifle. His expression was unreadable beneath his bearskin hat, his gaze fixed straight ahead as if nothing had happened. But everyone knew. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. For Oliver, it wasn't just a salute. It was recognition. It was proof that even though he was small, even though he was just a boy, he had been seen. A British soldier, one of the most disciplined, unshakable figures in the world, had acknowledged him. And that was something he would never forget. Oliver could still feel the rush of excitement coursing through him as he turned back to his father. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. He had spent so many days practicing, staring at himself in the mirror, perfecting his stance, his posture, his salute. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. But nothing could compare to the real thing. He looked over his shoulder once more at the Royal Guard, still standing in the same perfect posture as before. Had that salute really happened? If not for the gasps, the applause, the stunned looks on everyone's faces, Oliver might have thought he had imagined it. The elderly veteran standing nearby let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head in approval. "That's what it's all about," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. Oliver's father turned toward him, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" The veteran smiled. Deep lines creased his weathered face, but his eyes shone with understanding. He had seen moments like this before, small, fleeting, but deeply meaningful. "It's about respect," he said simply. That guard wasn't just following orders today. He saw that little boy for who he was, someone who respects their service, someone who looks up to them. And in that moment, he honored him back. Oliver had no idea that his salute had just broken a tradition, that moments like this were incredibly rare. To him, it was simple. He had given respect, and he had received it in return. As the crowd began to disperse, Oliver held his head a little higher, walking with more confidence than before. His father rested a hand on his shoulder. "You did good today, son." Oliver grinned, his cheeks still flushed with excitement. "Do you think one day I can be like them?" His father smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "If you work hard enough, I don't see why not." And as they walked away, leaving Buckingham Palace behind them, Oliver took one final glance at the Royal Guard. The soldier never looked his way again. He didn't need to. Because Oliver knew, that one moment, that single salute, had meant everything.